Hi everyone, welcome to today's video on radius, diameter, circumference, and pi. So, let's say you just opened a pizza box. Round, cheesy, beautiful. But what if I told you this pizza holds the secrets to understanding some of the most important math terms in geometry? So today we're going to slice into radius, diameter, circumference, and the magical number pi. And I'm sorry to break it to you, no, it's not an actual pie. So here's what we'll be learning today, all through pizza. First, we'll define the most important parts of a circle: the center, radius, diameter, circumference, pi, and more, with clear visuals so you can see exactly what they mean. Then I'll show you how these parts are mathematically connected using simple formulas. After that, I'll walk you through an original example step by step, solving it together so it all makes sense. And last but not least, I'm going to give you a practice problem so you can test your skills. And finally, we'll wrap it up with a conclusion. If you want to skip ahead to the practice problems, go for it. Just make sure you already understand the key formulas because they're the real tools behind solving problems. These are: diameter is 2 times the radius, circumference is pi times the diameter, and circumference is 2 times pi times the radius. If you're unsure about any of those or don't have a clue about what I just said, I recommend watching the whole video. You'll thank yourself later. So without further ado, let's go. So here we have a pizza, and we can call this basically a circle. A circle is a flat shape where every point along the edge is the same distance from a single point in the middle. So every one of these edges is the same distance from one single point, and we'll talk about that point next. That point is called the center, and it's the exact middle point of our circle. Here we see that point R is the exact middle point, our center. Every other point on the edge is the exact same distance from R, our center. And that's what makes this a circle. Next we have the radius. The radius is a line segment that starts exactly at the center. So here we have center R of our circle, and ends at any point on the circle's edge. So the radius can end at this point right here, or it can end at this point, or even at this point. It measures the distance from the middle of the circle to its boundary. And every radius in the circle is exactly the same length, no matter where it points. So you can think of it like an arm, reaching from the center of the edge, and there can be many such arms all the same length. Now, when you hear the word radii, it means the same thing. Don't get confused, it's exact same meaning, just the plural definition. So once again, all these radii, right here, measure the exact same length. You can go back in time if any of these concepts don't make sense to you. So the diameter. What is the diameter? Fancy word, but we don't need to know what it is. The diameter is a straight line segment that passes through the center of the circle and connects 2 points on the circle's edge. So we can see that this point and this point are connected through a line. And it goes all the way across the circle from one side to the other, passing through the middle point. And our middle point is R, our center. The diameter is always exactly twice as long as the radius. Before we get into that part, I would just like to note that the diameter is essentially how fat the circle is. So we see that our circle is pretty fat, and that's our diameter. So as I was saying, the diameter is always exactly twice as long as the radius. And remember, the radius goes from the center to the edge. That's half the distance across the circle. So it goes from the center to the edge. That's the radius. Now, if we have 2 of those, that's the diameter. So the diameter passes through the center. So it's basically 2 radii put together back to back. So 1 radii here and 1 radii here. So if one radius is R, then 2 of those side by side is R. So if this is R and this is R, that must mean our diameter is 2R. Once again, if this is R and this is R, our diameter is called 2R. Now, before we talk about how to find the distance all the way around a circle, we need to meet a very important number called pi. And it's written as a Greek letter, pi. As you can see here, it's marked by this symbol. Now, pi is a special number that shows up only with circles. It helps us understand how the size of the circle's edge relates to its width. And I'm going to talk about more of that property after I describe what the circumference is. So later on, I'll describe more about that. But all you need to know right now is that pi is about 3.14. But it's actually an endless decimal number that never repeats exactly. And we often use 3.14 or 22/7 to make calculations easier. So pi is a very special number when it comes to finding the circumference of a circle. And what is the circumference? We'll describe that in the next slide. The circumference is the total distance around the outside edge of a circle. So imagine walking all the way around a circular track. The length you travel is the circumference. And because this circle is perfectly round, we can find the distance using pi and either the diameter or the radius. And I'll describe that formula in the next slide. So all you need to know right now is the circumference is kind of like the perimeter of any shape. But here, for a circle, because a circle is a special shape, the perimeter is called the circumference. Now the circumference is the distance around the circle, and we can calculate it using either the diameter or the radius, as I mentioned before. Now the first formula we encounter to find the circumference, c, is pi times the diameter. So you remember that the diameter is how fat the circle is. All you need to do to find the circumference is multiply 3.14 times that. In calculators, you'll often see this symbol, so it can also give you the exact number. But if you're doing this by hand, 3.14 or 22/7 for pi will be the easiest and best way to go. Since the second formula is c equals 2 pi r. So c equals 2 times pi times r. So since the diameter is twice the radius, this formula just replaces the diameter with 2r. Mathematicians in the early days studied a unique property between the two relationships, circumference and diameter. Now, if you take any circle and measure the distance all the way around its edge, that's the circumference. And then measure the distance straight across the circle through the center, that's the diameter. Now, if you divide the circumference by the diameter, you always get the same number. No matter how big or small the number is, that number is called pi, and that's approximately 3.14. This means that the circumference is about 3.14 times longer than the diameter. The ratio never changes. It's a unique property of all circles. In this formula, we see circumference by diameter. Circumference is the distance all the way around the circle. Diameter is how fat the circle is. That's 3.14, about. And that's pi. So here we go over all the formulas. We have the diameter is 2 times the radius. The circumference is pi times the diameter. The circumference is 2 times pi times the radius. And pi equals the circumference by the diameter. Once again, we reviewed all these. If you want to go back and learn these more, then go back in the video. So we have example problem number 1. A circle has a radius of 5 meters. Find the diameter. And find the circumference. And leave your answer in terms of pi. So here we can draw our diagram. We have a circle, and we have the radius is 5 meters. Now they want us to find the diameter. So essentially, the diameter equals 2 times the radius. So we can plug that formula in, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But we also want to find the circumference, and we know that the circumference is 2 times pi times the radius. We have that the radius is 5 meters, and we know what pi is. So we can do 2 times 5 times 5. And this is described in this part. D equals 2r, so 2 times 5 equals 10 meters. C equals 2 pi r, 2 times pi times 5 equals 10 pi meters. Now, 31.42 meters doesn't exactly apply, so we want to keep our answer in pi. And when they say keep our answer in pi, that means pi should be part of the answer. So that's 10 pi meters. Example problem number 2. A circle has a circumference of 18 pi meters. Find the diameter and find the radius. So here we have the circumference as 18 pi centimeters. We want to find the diameter, how fat the circle is, and we want to find the radius, which is essentially half of that. So we can write our formula like this. Pi times d equals the circumference. So d equals circumference by pi. 18 pi by pi equals 18 centimeters. Now the radius is always going to be half of that. So we know that 18 by 2 is 9 centimeters. Now, here we're going to have a practice problem, so pause the video and see if you can solve this problem by yourself. A circular fountain has a diameter of 12 feet. What's the radius and what's the circumference? I'll reveal the answer on the next slide. So here's the answer. The radius is 6. According to this problem, the diameter is 12 feet, so 12 by 2 is 6. The circumference would be pi times the diameter, which is 12. So 12 pi, and that's about 37.7. So how did he do? Great, all right, or not great? Depending on that, you can go back and watch this video again. Thank you for listening and watching, and I hope you learned all about radius, diameter, circumference, and pi. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you.